It is the 27th of June 1798. General Napoleon Bonaparte and his massive expeditionary force of more than 300 ships and 55,000 men are sailing towards Egypt, a de jure Ottoman province, under the direct orders of the French governing body, the Directory. Arriving in Alexandria on the 1st of July 1798, Napoleon swiftly crushes the ruling Mamluks and enters Cairo on the 22nd of July of that year. In Egypt, and with the aim of placating the Egyptians, the ever-pragmatic Napoleon famously distributes his first address to the Egyptian people, where he proclaims, "In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, there is no God but Allah, who has no son and no partner in his rule. People of Egypt, you will be told that I have come to destroy your religion. Do not believe it. I have come to restore your rights usurped by the Mamluks. I respect God, His Prophet, and the Quran." Not only that, but on the 25th of July 1798, and recognizing the power of the ancient Al-Azhar University, Napoleon sets up a council of 9 sheikhs from the Al-Azhar University to govern Cairo, where he even unsuccessfully sought a fatwa from the Al-Azhar Imams to declare himself as a legitimate Muslim leader and allow Muslims to pledge allegiance to Bonaparte. All of this begs the question, what is this Al-Azhar University, and why was Napoleon so desperate to get its approval during his Egyptian expedition, even going as far as denouncing the Christian religion at the favor of Islam? This is the historiographer, in collaboration with the cultured Jinni, and today the intriguing history of Al-Azhar University and its role throughout the ages will be explored.
Jamiat Al-Azhar, the university of the most brilliant, arguably the most famous university in the Middle East, and also the greater Islamic world. Founded as a great mosque in between 970 and 972 AD by the Fatimid Caliphate under the Caliph Al-Mu'izz in their new capital of Cairo in Egypt, as a center of Islamic learning and to function as a place to spread their type of Ismaili Shia Islam. It formally organized by 988 as a center of learning in addition to being a mosque. Al-Azhar was and still is both a mosque and a center of learning, as it was common for most institutions of learning to also have religious functions during the medieval period in both the Arabic Islamic world and in the Christian European world. Al-Azhar was part of an enormous conversion effort on part of the Fatimids to convert people to their Ismaili Shia Islam. And knowledge and proselytizing went hand in hand in these endeavors, and manuscript records of the scholar Ahmed Hamid ad-Din al-Kermani indicate that up to 9,000 individuals might have been connected to this system of conversion and knowledge creation in Al-Azhar at the same time, at one point in Fatimid history. Speaking about the Fatimids, the later Fatimid Caliph Al-Hakim bi Amrillah added to Al-Azhar's premises and launched large-scale programs of learning, including many more subjects than just direct theological subjects, expanding Al-Azhar's breadth and scope regarding its function as a center of learning, to the degree that in the later Fatimid era and the coming Ayyubid era, several scholars of matters outside of just Islamic theology and Islamic jurisprudence would study and teach there. Even non-Muslim scholars, such as possibly the famous Jewish theologian and man of medicine Maimonides, was associated with the university, though contemporary evidence for this seems lacking. Al-Azhar was also part of a system of instituted scholarly grants given to gifted students within a sort of limited preschool system that existed in the Fatimid Caliphate. Al-Azhar became part of what could be seen as the last stage of what could be considered an early, though very limited, public schooling system. A famous guide library was also created that unfortunately was destroyed in the Ayyubid period. And speaking about the Ayyubids, following the Fatimids were the Ayyubids, the dynasty of Salahuddin, or Saladin as he is known to most Westerners, who changed the religion from Ismaili Shia Islam to Shafi'i Sunni Islam, and Al-Azhar thus became a center for Sunni Islamic studies and spread of Sunni Islam. The Ayyubids furthermore separated the mosque and learning center as two different institutions or organizations, though they still shared the same building complex. Though it should be said that during the age of the Ayyubids, the university did decline in importance, mainly through a lack of funding, and the Ayyubids' decision to remove the stipends and grants for students, and was also largely supplemented by a lot of smaller institutions in Egypt that filled a similar function that Al-Azhar had done before, as other centers of learning were appearing during this time. It is possible that this was due to mistrust towards Al-Azhar as an institution that had been founded by the Shia Fatimids, though an equally likely scenario is that the decreased funding to Al-Azhar had more to do with the Ayyubids' financial mismanagement and economic troubles, resulting in less funding. You also do have that the sources claim that Al-Azhar did receive certain funding from the Ayyubids for certain teachers and for the rebuilding of the mosque university complex. So it was not total economical neglect. And also at this time, it seems that the Ayyubids did have control over the institutions of Al-Azhar and thus could intervene if they did preach a theology that they did not approve of. So they lacking this control or having this mistrust of the institution is not that likely. In any case, during the Ayyubids, Al-Azhar had less of a status than its former luster under the Fatimids, where it had truly been at the center of knowledge in the Islamic world, with even non-Shia Muslims from all around the Middle East attending it. Its status as a main center of knowledge would be regained under the later Mamluks, as Al-Azhar once again gained influence and rose in prestige among the centers of learning in the Islamic world. And the grants for gifted potential students were reintroduced during the Mamluk era, and a system of paid set salaries was also introduced by the Mamluk state, rather than being a system of earnings by the tuition fees and donations by private individuals and families, as had been the case before in Al-Azhar's history. A college was built for the institution in 1340 outside of the mosque as a separate building, and the largest expansion since the Fatimids. Further expansions were made in the late 1400s, and buildings were renovated and new dormitories were built for the students. The university expanded a lot and also incorporated a lot of the smaller institutions that existed in Cairo and also in the rest of Egypt regarding Islamic learning, putting these institutions under the authority of Al-Azhar directly. Consequently, Al-Azhar was in the center of a centralization effort regarding Islamic education during the Mamluk period and became once again the center of knowledge in the Islamic world. The Mamluk relationship to Al-Azhar was a rather rocky relationship between the Mamluk rulers and the learned men of Al-Azhar, despite the Mamluks' rather great patronage of Al-Azhar, with Al-Azhar serving as an active, pious, populist counterweight to the Mamluks' perceived and pious behavior, with the scholars seeing it as part of Hisba, the holding of the rulership responsible for its actions, by condemning them at times. This was a more active and independent rule for Al-Azhar than previously, where before Al-Azhar had only more or less been under the thumb of previous rulers, rather than a semi-independent institution with its own power as it became under the Mamluks. You see this in how preachers from the institution constantly challenge the Mamluk power through use of populist pious rhetoric, often by undermining their authority by creating uproars and protests, often at the expense of groups that were not following the Shafi'i interpretation of Sunni Islam, which was dominant in Al-Azhar at this time. For example, in 1314, the radical populist Shafi'i Sheikh Nur ad-Din al-Bakri and his polemics against the Mamluk Sultanate's elites, where you can see him accusing them of supporting Christians at the expense of the Muslim community, and he even went so far as organizing an attack on a church and large-scale protests with the excuse that candles had been given to the church as a form of charity and as a gesture of goodwill by officials who were connected to the Mamluk Sultanate's bureaucracy. This was, as I alluded to previously, part of a greater pattern of conflict, and as the Mamluks were a lot more decentralized and oligarchic in power with a weaker centralized ruler than previous rulers of Islamic Egypt, this meant that they often lacked the unity to effectively oppose these challenges coming from Al-Azhar and to subdue its various preachers, who often enjoyed great popular support among the people, and often factions within the Mamluk Sultanate would join in these challenges to the authority and or aid in these instigated persecutions in order to placate scholars associated with Al-Azhar. And these tendencies of inflammatory rhetoric and incitement to protests and persecutions would later get intensified in the inter-religious violence in Cairo of 1321, which was a massive clash between Muslim and Coptic Christian protesters, with many dead and several churches burned to the ground, and in the massive persecutions in 1354 of Coptic Christians, both of which I, the culture Jinni, intend to make future videos about. There is no denying that the scholars of Al-Azhar were instrumental in the Mamluk period persecutions that converted many of the Christians of Egypt, which before the centuries of Mamluk rule had large portions of Christians in its total population. Though Christians were the main target, it was not only Christians that suffered, as other Muslim groups such as Shia Muslims and Sunnis that did not follow the Shafi'i interpretation of Islamic jurisprudence were also targeted by condemnations, declared apostates, and thus killed. And these persecutions were a part of a far greater pattern of persecutions that occurred during the Mamluk period. During the period of the Mamluks, Al-Azhar became an independent institution of coercive power that both held rulers responsible and was involved in the persecutions of various groups that did not conform to their Islamic orthodoxy. Gone were the days of the tolerance and openness of the Fatimid and Ayyubid eras, where even non-Muslims could be present in Al-Azhar. During the Mamluk era, even non-Shafi'i Sunni Muslims were barred from the institution at times, and the Shafi'i interpretation of Islam would remain totally dominant until the era of the Ottoman rulership of Egypt, where the institution would open up for other schools of thought within Sunni Islam. Which leads to the next era, which the historiographer will talk about.
Following the battles of Mardabiq, Khan Yunis, and Al-Raidaniyah in late 1516 and early 1517, the victorious Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Selim the Grim, was able to defeat the Mamluk Sultanate. While the last Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mutawakkil III, was imprisoned and taken back to Constantinople, where he renounced the Caliphate to Selim I, the rest of Egypt saw few administrative changes, as true power rested with the entrenched Mamluks, who now served the Ottomans. It is unknown what was Al-Azhar's reaction to Selim's takeover of the title of Caliph, though it most likely remained silent. In Egypt, Sultan Selim showed great respect to the Al-Azhar Mosque and its university, where he even attended the Al-Azhar Mosque for the final Friday prayer during his last week in Egypt, with mosques reciting his and subsequent Ottoman sultans' names each Friday. Despite this reverence, the Ottomans ceased to fund the upkeep of Al-Azhar, where detachment would become a dominant theme in Al-Azhar's relation with the Ottoman government. Yet, what is known is that there was discontent amongst the majority Shafi'i imams of Al-Azhar in Egypt and in Syria against the only and official madhab of the Ottomans, the Hanafi madhab, with major imams in Egypt and Syria even changing their madhab to retain their official positions as qadis and judges. There was also major discontent against the highly unpopular Ottoman marriage fee. Nevertheless, these issues would subside over the next centuries, as Al-Azhar would adapt and teach the four Islamic jurisprudence schools of thought, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali madhabs, where its prestige and influence grew to such an extent that it became the dominant learning hub in the Sunni Muslim world, surpassing Constantinople and the holy cities. Major academic revisions took place during the Ottoman period, with the post of the Sheikh, or in other words, the Dean of Al-Azhar, being formally established. While there was no system of academic degrees, with only the professor deeming if the student was qualified enough, the average study length was of 6 years. Note that in Al-Azhar, the students from the same region organized themselves into riwaqs, or groups such as the Turkish or Syrian riwaqs, for example. By the 18th century, the leftover Mamluks in Egypt had regained much of their influence and had become independent in all but name from the high port in Istanbul. They thus began to sponsor numerous renovations throughout Cairo and in Al-Azhar specifically. For example, Uthman Bey al-Qasdugli, a powerful Mamluk Bey, sponsored several additions and renovations in the early 18th century to the mosque, where he built a riwaq for blind students in 1735 and sponsored the rebuilding of the Turkish and Syrian sections. This marked the beginning of the largest set of architectural renovations to be undertaken since the collapse of the Mamluk Sultanate. The best example of this new wave of renovations was the renovations undertaken by Abd al-Rahman al-Katkhuda, the head of the Ottoman Janissaries in Egypt, heavily affiliated with the Mamluks. Under his direction, 3 new gates were built: the Bab al-Muzayyinin, Bab al-Sa'ida, and Bab al-Shuraba, from which food, often rice and soup, would be served to the students. By the late 18th century, influenced by European Enlightenment, more secular courses were taught at Al-Azhar, such as science and philosophy. The European shock to Egyptian society and, by extension, Al-Azhar, would come in the form of the previously aforementioned Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in July of 1798. It is off the blistering shores of Alexandria that Napoleon famously issued his proclamation to the people of Egypt in an attempt to peacefully subdue the Egyptians, where he said, "In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, from Napoleon, the general of the French, to the people of Egypt. For too long the Beys who govern Egypt have insulted the French nation and covered their traitors in slander. The hour of their punishment has come. People of Egypt, they have told you that I have come to destroy your religion, but do not believe it. Wasn't it us who destroyed the Knights of Malta? Wasn't it us who destroyed the Pope?" This speech was, overall, well received by the Egyptians, where rumors even began to circulate that Napoleon had embraced Islam. However, the reality was that Napoleon was merely trying to ease tensions and assure a swift occupation of Egypt for logistical reasons, a reality that was noted by Abd al-Rahman al-Jabarti, an Al-Azhar graduate and a major Muslim chronicler during the period of Napoleon's invasion, who was highly cynical of Napoleon's real intentions. Pouncing on the confusion Napoleon created and recognizing the power of Al-Azhar, on the 25th of July and soon after entering Cairo, Napoleon set up a diwan, or a council, made up of 9 Al-Azhar sheikhs with the aim of governing Cairo, where he even unsuccessfully sought a fatwa from the Al-Azhar imams that would deem it permissible under Islamic law to declare allegiance to Napoleon. Nevertheless, Napoleon's efforts to win over both the Egyptians and the Ottomans proved unsuccessful, as the Ottoman Empire declared war on the French on the 9th of September 1798. This declaration exacerbated the already tense situation in the streets of Cairo, resulting in a brutal revolt against French troops launched from the Al-Azhar Mosque on the 21st of October 1798. When negotiations with the rebels in Napoleon's diwan broke down, Napoleon ordered that Cairo be fired upon from the Cairo citadel. Aiming his cannons directly at Al-Azhar Mosque, a major revolt stronghold, Napoleon ordered his artillery to fire on Al-Azhar. Napoleon's army intentionally desecrated the mosque, ransacking the riwaqs and libraries, as well as throwing copies of the Quran on the floor. Any Egyptian caught with weapons was beheaded. During the revolt of Cairo, it is estimated that 3,000 to 6,000 Egyptians were killed at the cost of 300 Frenchmen. Further, 6 of the Imams of Al-Azhar were executed for their role in the revolt. Al-Azhar would therefore become a pivotal pillar of popular resistance against French occupation, vowing to extract revenge on the occupiers with fiery speeches, where Egyptians rallied under its banner to expel the now hated French occupiers. Following the disaster in the Battle of the Nile in early August of 1798, where British Admiral Horatio Nelson won a decisive victory against the French fleet in Alexandria, and following Napoleon's failure during the Syrian campaign by mid-1799, the general decided to leave Egypt in secret and head back to France by the 22nd of August, 1799. As such, Commander Jean-Baptiste Kléber was left in command. However, in March 1800, General Kléber was assassinated by Suleiman al-Halabi, a Kurdish Syrian student at Al-Azhar who avenged the massacre of his colleagues during the revolt of Cairo. Following this assassination, Napoleon ordered the closing of the mosque, and Al-Azhar's doors remained shut until Ottoman and British assistance arrived in August of 1801. The French invasion still had its benefits, as Napoleon brought with him a collection of French scientists collectively known as les savants, each expert in their scientific fields, thereby influencing Al-Azhar to change the conservative tradition of the mosque. Following the French withdrawal from Egypt in 1801, a period of instability characterized Egyptian politics, where one Albanian man would emerge victorious from the chaos between the Mamluks and Ottomans in 1805, thanks to his strategic alliances with the popular Al-Azhar Sheikh and leading Mamluk notables, Mohammed Ali Pasha. By the early 1800s, Mohammed Ali Pasha sought to consolidate his control over Egypt, where this consolidation is best described by his infamous liquidation of the Mamluks in 1811 in the Cairo citadel. Al-Azhar's massive influence and independence would equally be curtailed, thereby starting an ever-declining trend of a reduction of the university's political power. To achieve this goal, the Pasha took a number of steps to reduce the ability of the Al-Azhar to influence the government. For example, he initially imposed exorbitant taxes on the lands owned by the Al-Azhar University, which formed a major portion of its income. Then, in June of 1809, he seized all of the agricultural lands owned by the university, outraging the sheikhs and imams of Al-Azhar, leading to a brutal revolt which was subsequently crushed. The Pasha also limited and replaced any government post previously occupied by Azhar students via students educated under his newly formed Western-style public education. However, in Al-Azhar itself, Muhammad Ali encouraged the establishment of secular learning, where medicine, math, and modern science were adopted into the curriculum. In 1818, Muhammad Ali's campaigns in Arabia against the First Saudi state and his destruction of the Saudi capital, Diriyah, would start an age-old feud between Al-Azhar and Wahhabism, a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam that took hold over Najd by the 1800s. The Muhammad Ali Dynasty furthered the development of Egypt, and under Ismail Pasha the Magnificent, the grandson of Muhammad Ali, major public projects were started with the aim of revitalizing the infrastructure of Cairo by the late 1860s. These projects were funded by the highly profitable Egyptian cotton industry, with an example being the completion of the construction of the Suez Canal in 1869. Indeed, under Ismail Pasha, the return of the royal patronage to Al-Azhar came in full swing, such as the restoration of the previously aforementioned Bab as-Sa'ida. However, Ismail Pasha's construction craze caused the accumulation of large debts to European bankers, mainly British, to fund his projects. With the massive debt held by the British, and with Ahmed Arabi's revolt in 1882, Great Britain used the justification of restoring law and order to invade Egypt, thus starting a new chapter in Al-Azhar's history. When Abbas Hilmi II, the grandson of Ismail, became Khidewi in 1809, he carried on the renovations initiated by his father and grandfather. For example, he redesigned the mosque's main facade and constructed a new 3-story riwaq in neo-Mamluk style, thereby harmonizing Al-Azhar with the sprawling metropolis of Cairo. In terms of changes in education, a significant series of transformations initiated during the leadership of Ismail Pasha in the 1870s, particularly the standardization of student examinations, were prolonged during the period of British governance. Subsequent endeavors to bring about modernization in the education system were undertaken under Hilmi's reign, amid British occupation. The consolidation of manuscripts from various mosques into a central library, enhancements in student sanitation, and the establishment of a systematic examination process were key developments. Starting in 1885, and in a rare move by the Mohammed Ali Dynasty, Al-Azhar was granted more autonomy, as the direct administration of other educational colleges in Egypt was placed under the authority of the Al-Azhar Mosque. In politics, Al-Azhar continuously called for the withdrawal of the British occupation and the recognition of Sudan as an integral part of Egypt. When the First World War started in 1914, the British deposed Abbas Hilmi II at the favor of his uncle, Hussein Kamel, where Egypt formally gained its independence from the Ottoman Empire and was officially declared a sultanate, the first time since the Mamluk Sultanate 400 years earlier, then eventually changing its official name to the Kingdom of Egypt and the Sudan in 1922. In 1924, an interesting issue would arise, as the Turkish National Assembly, led by the secular Kemal Atatürk, abolished the Caliphate and exiled the last Caliph, where Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, declared himself as Caliph over the Muslims. The then King Fuad of Egypt asserted that he possessed superior qualifications for the Caliph position compared to other ambitious Muslim leaders. Given the esteemed status of Al-Azhar as a historical center of Islamic education, numerous senior imams in Egypt maintained that only Al-Azhar could resolve the Caliphate matter. Scholars of Al-Azhar subsequently launched an unyielding critique against King Hussein's assertion to the Caliphate, accusing him of being a tool of the British Empire. This is why in 1926, a congress to elect a caliph was planned in Cairo, yet only 39 Muslim delegates participated, a significant portion of whom were Egyptians, despite the committee sending out hundreds of invitations to Muslim countries. Persistent disagreements and conflicting interests made it impossible to elect a caliph, ultimately leading to the failure of the Congress. During the rule of King Fuad I, significant changes were implemented in the educational framework of Al-Azhar through the enactment of two laws. The initial law, introduced in 1930, resulted in the division of the school into three distinct departments: Arabic language, Sharia, and theology. Furthermore, the acquisition of a degree in any of these fields mandated the successful completion of formal examinations. 6 years later, a second law was promulgated, leading to the relocation of the school's central office to a newly constructed edifice situated opposite to the mosque. Over time, supplementary structures were erected to complement the existent departmental buildings. It was during the late 1930s that a pivotal expansion occurred in Al-Azhar's curriculum, encompassing the inclusion of non-Arabic languages and modern sciences. The final king of the Mohammed Ali Dynasty, King Farouk of Egypt, became King of Egypt at age 16 in 1936. Interestingly, Al-Azhar was a strong supporter of the new king, still continuing its efforts to have him claimed as Caliph of all Muslims and calling for the withdrawal of the British Empire from Egypt. During the Second World War, and much like the rest of Egypt, Al-Azhar supported Germany over the now severely hated British occupation, where pro-German protests took place in Al-Azhar in 1942. Following the Egyptian Revolution of 1952, masterminded by the Free Officers movement under the leadership of Muhammad Najib and Jamal Abdel Nasser, a profound change in Al-Azhar occurred. The university underwent a detachment from the mosque, initiated by the acquisition and demolition of surrounding properties to pave the way for a modern campus by 1955. The mosque ceased to function as a school, and the institution gained official university status in 1961. However, in 1961, legislative changes marked the separation of the educational and religious functions of the institution, influencing perceptions within the Muslim world. This legal shift also introduced secular departments within Al-Azhar, such as engineering and economics. During his tenure as Prime Minister and later President of Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser actively aimed to reduce the influence of the sheikhs of Al-Azhar. The nationalization of Al-Azhar charities in 1952 and placing them under the Ministry of Religious Endowments in 1955 severely restricted the mosque's financial autonomy. Sharia courts were abolished, merging religious courts with the state judicial system, thereby limiting the Al-Azhar imams' independence. In 1961, a reform law further diminished Al-Azhar's autonomy, granting the Egyptian president the authority to appoint the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, losing its independence in curriculum and mosque functions. The reforms paradoxically brought them further into the state apparatus, providing resources while simultaneously restricting control. The imams, initially critical of socialism, offered religious justifications for Nasser's Islamic socialism. Al-Azhar countered the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood and Wahhabism, supporting Nasser during his mass imprisonment of Brotherhood members. Al-Azhar also legitimized the 1967 and 1973 wars with Israel. After Nasser's death, Anwar al-Sadat aimed to restore Al-Azhar's symbolic leadership in the Arab world, saying in 1971 that the Arab world cannot function without Egypt and its Azhar. While Anwar al-Sadat initially eased restrictions on the Muslim Brotherhood to counter the Nasserite movement, he later suppressed dissenting voices, including many Azharis. Sadat utilized Al-Azhar to garner support for peace with Israel in 1979, despite earlier opposition from the institution. Hosni Mubarak, Sadat's successor, granted more autonomy to the mosque, with the Sheikh of Al-Azhar asserting his independence at times. While the modern history of Al-Azhar remains interesting, it is beyond the scope of this video, as it is filled with controversy. This is why we decided to end the video in the year 1979, a vital year in the history of the Middle East, not only due to the aforementioned peace, but also due to a revolt that forever changed modern geopolitics, the Iranian Revolution. In conclusion, Al-Azhar today has influence well beyond Egypt, as it stands as a vital force in the Sunni Muslim world, a go-to source for religious guidance and decisions. Its journey from the Fatimids to today, filled with ups and downs, highlights the complex relationship between religion, politics, and education. This unique blend has woven an unforgettable thread into the vibrant fabric of Egypt's Islamic history. This video, then consider subscribing to our channels to spread history. This has been the historiographer in collaboration with the cultured Jinni. For now, see you in the next video.